Half the people in Europe vanished because of one deadly plague, the Black Death. It wasn't just a health disaster, it turned the entire world upside down. Jobs were left undone, farms abandoned, and cities became empty. But here's the twist. This massive tragedy might be the reason we see wealth and power the way we do today. How did something so terrible lead to workers gaining power, the rise of the middle class, and even the start of modern economies? Could this tragic event actually be the foundation of the wealth systems we know now? Let's find out. The Black Death wasn't just a health crisis, it was a world-changing disaster. Between 1347 and 1351, the plague spread like wildfire, wiping out nearly half of Europe's population. Imagine entire towns disappearing, streets eerily empty, and people desperate for answers. But this wasn't just about lives lost, it was about the ripple effect on how the world worked. With so many people gone, everything slowed down. The rich and powerful, who once controlled everything, suddenly faced a world where there weren't enough workers to keep their farms running or their businesses afloat. This wasn't just bad for them, it created a shift in power. For the first time, regular workers started to realize they were more important than ever. The shortage of labor meant workers could demand better pay and conditions. Suddenly, they had a say in their lives. This changed the social structure and gave rise to a new balance of power. People who were once ignored now had a voice. So, how did this labor shortage create opportunities? Let's move into what happened when fields and workshops sat empty, forcing the world to adapt. When the plague swept through, fields were left untended and workshops became silent. Entire industries came to a halt because there simply weren't enough people to keep them running. Farmers couldn't harvest crops, blacksmiths couldn't forge tools, and merchants couldn't sell goods. This led to a massive breakdown in the economy. But here's where things took an interesting turn. With fewer people around, landowners and business owners started to panic. They needed workers desperately, and the only way to get them was to offer better pay and working conditions. For the first time, laborers had bargaining power. After the plague wiped out so many people, peasants found themselves in a position of power they had never imagined. There were too few workers left to keep farms running, build homes, or maintain cities. Those who survived suddenly had choices. They could demand better wages, more land, and fairer treatment, or simply move to a new landlord offering better terms. For centuries, peasants had been tied to the land with no way to improve their lives. But the labor shortage forced landowners to compete for workers. Some even offered freedom from old systems like serfdom, where peasants were practically owned by their lords. This broke the chains of an oppressive system and gave many workers the chance to dream of a better future. The newfound power wasn't just about money, it reshaped society. Laws were introduced to stop wages from rising too much, but those rules often failed. People realized they could negotiate, leave bad jobs, or start small businesses. This change hit the ruling class hard. They were used to controlling everything, but now they had to share their wealth and power. The plague didn't just cause chaos, it also reshuffled wealth in ways no one expected. Before the Black Death, most of the wealth was locked up with landowners and nobles. They controlled everything from vast estates to the labor of peasants. But the labor shortage forced a massive redistribution of resources. Landlords couldn't keep up with the rising costs of paying workers or maintaining their lands. Many sold parts of their estates, giving peasants and merchants a chance to buy property for the first time. This created a new group of landowners and helped shrink the gap between the rich and the poor. But it wasn't all good news. Smaller villages and isolated towns were hit hardest. Some were abandoned entirely, and people flocked to cities looking for better opportunities. Cities became hubs of trade and industry, giving rise to a stronger middle class. Meanwhile, some old noble families lost their wealth and influence, fading into history. Trade also changed during this time. Merchants began to thrive as the demand for goods increased. Those who could adapt to the new economy found themselves at the top, while those who couldn't were left behind. The Black Death didn't just change who had power, it pushed people to find smarter ways to rebuild. With fewer workers available, communities had to innovate to survive. One big change was in farming. Farmers started using better tools like plows and new techniques to grow more food with less labor. This shift laid the groundwork for modern agriculture. Cities too began to adapt. They improved sanitation systems, like cleaning streets and building sewers, to stop diseases from spreading so quickly. Public health became a focus for the first time as people realized how deadly poor living conditions could be. Trade networks also expanded. Merchants created safer routes and started using contracts and banking systems to keep business going, even in risky times. These changes helped rebuild economies and opened up new markets. Education shifted as well. With so many clergy members lost, universities and schools focused more on science, math, and practical knowledge rather than just religion. This change encouraged innovation in fields like engineering and medicine. The challenges of the plague forced societies to think differently. These ideas didn't just help them recover, they set the stage for the Renaissance and the modern world we know today. As villages faded and cities grew, urban centers became the heart of change after the Black Death. Survivors flocked to cities looking for work, and with more people in smaller spaces, trade and commerce began to thrive. Markets buzzed with activity as merchants and craftsmen became essential to rebuilding economies. This urban shift planted the seeds for capitalism. Instead of relying on lords and land, people focused on money, trade, and business. Skilled workers like blacksmiths, weavers, and builders became highly valued, and many formed guilds to protect their trades and negotiate better deals. Banks also gained importance, offering loans for rebuilding and supporting the growing market economy. Wealth began to circulate differently. No longer concentrated in the hands of nobles, it was spread across a more diverse group of people. Cities became hubs of opportunity, transforming the way society thought about wealth and power. The Black Death left scars, but it also rewrote the rules of society. It shattered the old feudal system, where peasants were stuck in poverty, and gave workers the power to demand better lives. This wasn't just a small change, it was a turning point. Who knew a deadly plague could rewrite the rules of wealth and power? If you're fascinated by stories like this and love diving into the history that shaped our modern world, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. We've got more surprising and eye-opening tales coming your way.